App config and you. I'm trying to think that could potentially sound like a rom-com or something like that, maybe. A tragedy. There we go.
It could be both. Starts as one, then the other. Could be a comedy.
App config is something that I've over the years found really useful. It's going to be awesome to hear Daniel, who understands these things, who's generally the person who explains to me how useful it is, explaining this to everyone else. So Daniel, away we go.
Cool. Thanks, Marcus. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Daniel MacLaughlin. I'm a consulting engineer at Jamf. Been at Jamf for 9 years. I'm older than people think. But yeah, I always enjoy seeing Xworld and DevWorld and stuff like that as well. Keep forcing myself to present. People keep accepting. Don't know why, but here we go. I don't like making slides. Until this morning, there was 10. Now there's 12. But I like doing live stuff. So we're going to go very high level on what is app config. This was originally sort of geared at devs. Some track change, stuff like that there. So I'm going to try and do a little bit of both, some benefits for the admins, and then if some devs in the room about what is this thing, how can I add it, why should I add it, that kind of stuff. Leads into that there, obviously live stuff, and then some questions, resources, throwing fruit and no tomatoes. I mean, cool. So app config, for those who are unaware, it's been around since iOS 7. It is not a new thing, but unfortunately, it's sort of like kind of fell off to the wayside. More OSs came later on with tvOS 10 and macOS 11. Haven't really seen too much taken up with macOS because we had MCX, we had config profiles. There was no real benefit for both app developers and administrators to try and add this in. So for this sort of presentation, I'm going to be more iOS, iPadOS focused, and that's where I've seen the majority of app config out in the wild for it, because apps are sandboxed in iOS, trying to read in config profiles. It's a whole thing. For the devs in the room, if there are devs in the room or watching on the recording, maybe not, this is something that admins can't just decide, I want to add app config to this app that I found. The app needs to support it. It needs to be written in a way that knows where to read it. And I will show you that. But it is also available for MDM enterprise apps, but BYOD enrolled. Someone was talking yesterday with managed Apple IDs and user enrollment. It was Martin, and they're like, okay, we've got Slack EMM, we've got Dropbox EMM. Those are all BYOD, but available with app config. I forgot what I was talking about for a second. Cool. So, gratuitous Anvil, naturally. There was a JNUC presentation last year from Emily and, well, for those who don't know Emily, otherwise known as Dr. K. And she runs the sort of Jamf at Jamf, the end user compute client engineering team outside Jamf. So she has a very challenging job at times. And also Kyle, who's one of our principal software engineers. If you've used any of the Jamf apps, he's touched, I think, all of them except for Jamf Trust. So he's been at Jamf for like 7+ years. Very, very smart guy. So that was a JNUC talk last year. Would highly recommend. There will be links at the end for all of this. The other resource for this was a blog post that I found, a fantastic blog post by Marco Eidinger. And if I get that wrong, I apologize. He wrote this blog post in about 2022. It's a fantastic overview for both an admin and more for a dev about how app config works. He gives a sample app. He explains what it is. I add a link for that there. But that was those two presentations really helped me infer on what this talk was going to be about. So let's circle back on the why we'd want app config. It's got a few different reasons, some few scenarios. We can all read these here, but yeah, so we all have probably used a bunch of apps that do support app config, even if we're not actually using app config in there. If I use Microsoft Outlook for iOS as an example, with app config, if it's deployed by MDM, we can actually insert information that's not available to the app. Because apps are sandboxed, they are locked down, they're not allowed to access certain pieces of information that MDM administrators take for granted, maybe. So something like an email address. Pre-populate someone's email in, so a better end user experience for them. They open up the app, there it is. Continuing on with Microsoft Outlook as an example, maybe you want to force more enhanced security. So something about requiring biometrics, passcode when you open up the app. Maybe you've left the phone unlocked on your table, walked away, to then reopen up the Outlook app, you don't see all the emails in plain text and delete or forward or whatever you want to do. Again, those are settings that are powered by app config. As far as I'm aware, Outlook doesn't support any branding. That might be a feature request, chat to some Microsoft people, but there are plenty of other apps that support app config to maybe customize the look and feel of the app. Now, you can't change the app icon that is baked into the app's assets. You could, in theory, put a bunch of other assets in there, and then app config could point to those different ones, but that on the developer is a lot of headache, a lot of different assets. The app gets very big. But once you launch it, maybe you want to change the look and feel of the color of the app inside it, change the background color, put a header logo, all these things. So apps like Jamf Setup and Reset have that sort of support. Same for self-service, or some people around with that there. Lots of other apps that I've sort of encountered that done that. Most of them, unfortunately, have been written by MDM vendors, because MDM vendors are the only ones that were aware app config was a thing. So here's a few apps amongst many, just I can't put them all on one slide. So quite a few people here probably know self-service. That requires app config. You went to the App Store, downloaded self-service in the App Store, probably not going to have a great experience because there's information that needs to be fed back in on where it goes. Setup and reset, also, again, probably familiar for some people, some not. Middle ones, really hope you know at least one of those. They are quite common. But yeah, Google Chrome, if you're looking at doing Chrome management, insert in a private key via app config for iOS, so that it knows what enterprise management to talk to. Edge as well, you might want to control, what was it you can control Edge? There's managed open in, some copy and paste, some, again, it's more security settings. Outlook, as I already spoke about, stuff like that there. The bottom three are probably apps that a lot of people in the room are probably not familiar with. These are actually apps that the team that I work with at Jamf and myself have sort of actually built and then shared out with the community, except for the middle one. I'll come to that. The bottom left is called Managed, the name here, Managed View. It's like Managed Web View? No. Managed View. This is kind of like an enhanced kiosk app. So if you're trying to just push like a web clip and you got the URL, you don't really get as much control as you would with an actual app. You can talk into the system. So with that, we can define what the URL is via app config and a bunch of other stuff there. The middle one is an app that I did help write, which was Jamf Migrate. That's helping a user re-enroll the device. For macOS, easy. We just reach out to Bart, we get a Swift dialog and script it. Can't really run Swift dialog on iOS yet. Feature request. No. So this is a way of sort of guiding a user to re-enroll, because we've had other workflows where someone pushed down a web clip to open up to then re-enroll a device. Web clip was attached to the MDM. MDM profile removes, web clip gone, user stuck, walks away. So this is a way we can have apps that are a bit stickier and we can trigger some stuff there. The last one was a really cool app that came about from COVID. There were some good things that came out of COVID. This was actually what we call Jamf Assessment. This is a proctoring exam app. So we had school districts that were all like having to do their final exams, but they were remote, they were home, but they had to proctor and all they had was an iPad. If anyone's had to do any exams during COVID, they were like, okay, here's your laptop, put the webcam on, show it around, all that. All well and good, but one's if you don't have a laptop. So this was a way of doing it in a managed view. Have one side was your test, another was the camera on, person could see. Some really cool creative things with that there. So this is what app config will look like. It's in XML, because as Marcus sort of alluded to in his previous talk, there's a lot of things that Apple like to do that are XML. This thing's been around since 2013. It's going to be on XML. JSON was not really that popular back then. So it's a dictionary array of XML keys and values. Again, the app developer needs to support what these keys are called and what the values are going to be. So this is for self-service, pretty straightforward on that there. We can then also reference in information from the MDM that is not available to a traditional app. Things like the MAC address, serial number, person, UDID, all of those are protected and are available on reporting. For ones where you've got BYOD, those information is not available to the MDM because user personal stuff. Martin can chat more about that. But yeah, so these are other ways of just being able to insert information and enhance the app experience. So I'm quite nerdy, technical. I like the hows of it rather than the whys, but the whys are very important because we have to convince the people who are doing the hows of why this is useful. So there's two things that the app developer first needs to do. They need to write the app for one, but they need to also then define what their keys and values are. So they need to define that schema, that structure. Then they need to sort of incorporate that model into their code. They will also need to be aware of how they're going to submit their app to the App Store. If they are making an app that is solely reliant on app config, it will likely fail a submission to the App Store, to the public App Store, because someone's going to try and test it without an MDM. They're not going to see its experience. They're not going to know what the app does. We have seen apps rejected for that stance. But assuming that they're doing that and they're doing like an if-else statement, not there, don't do it. This is the path where all that information lives, com.apple.configuration.managed. It's literally that one key. That's where app config gets saved into. It lives within the user defaults. So if you've ever opened up an app, just a personal app, and maybe you're like in a GPS app and you change your personal preferences from miles to kilometers, or in the weather app, you're changing from Fahrenheit to Celsius. That's something that would live in a user's default. It's a piece of information that is persistent across the app relaunching, even if you force quit and reopen. Again, you can sort of force things to be rechecked and refreshed. So this sort of lives as nested inside user defaults. It's a specific management. Once we have a developer on board and has done all this there, the MDM needs to be able to do something. So it needs to support app config. Most modern ones out there do. I think I've only come across 2 that don't, and I wouldn't call them modern. But I'm not here to name names. So you need to support things. The second one there is optional. I have seen this one optional in some MDMs, but the first one is the install application command. The application is being installed. It's got app config at time of installation. The second command is more around when you've already got an existing app present. So Martin might, after this, reach out to Okta about this, because if you already have an existing app, they need to support a check for settings being applied as well. This is something the app config will do. But there's another command that MDM can run that says, we're managing the app, we're reapplying the settings, rather than it's just a one and done at the install. That's something that, especially with moving to BYOD, a lot of people have had to sort of done workflows. I have to delete the app, reinstall the app via a management service, so it gets it during there. It's something that Jamf does do support this command, and I will show this in the live. But then the app developer also has to support checking for it on these changes as well as on install. So only 3 steps, really, doesn't sound too difficult. So why is the majority of apps don't support this? So one example that sort of came about was this sort of last year, and I've been trying to get more into development. So I started joining the Sydney Cocoa Heads meetups because I'm from Sydney. Melbourne one's a bit of a commute. And I was chatting to one of the organizers, and I was saying where I was from. We're from Jamf. My app development's very low, but playing around with like app config. And he just had a blank face on him. So I prompted, like, you heard of app config? Never heard of it. Been a developer for over 10 years. Never heard of this. Came out in iOS 7, 2013. That's a challenge. If you have developers that never heard of it, we as admins are not going to benefit from it. So we need to sort of help educating and sharing information across the board. So like anyone else, you hear the term app config, might go to your search engine of choice and Google it. Not going to find too much information. You might find a website that was built in 2016 called appconfig.org. It hasn't had any revisions on it since 2016. So you're then further discouraged as a developer. Well, this seems like it's a lost cause. Why am I going to try and look into this? There's this old page, bunch of MDM names on there, no benefit for me. All right, maybe they're not deterred, they keep going. They're on that page, they find a link to an example of Apple's own developer documentation with a sample code. The sample code is revision 1.0, released in 2013. That's where the developer walks away. And I don't blame them. Because after all of that, you're like, this doesn't seem like it's being supported. This doesn't seem like it's maintained. all I would be asking for is headache for no real benefit. So, and that's what we sort of need to change, because if you are a prospective app developer and you support this for like an enterprise, can then might be the swing and difference of you support an enterprise model. And it could be something as simple as like, we support changing the background color to match your company's branding. I've seen apps win on that alone. Never underestimate the power of marketing. So, as I said, I don't like doing slides. That was all of them, apart from this and resources. So I did make a sacrifice to the dev gods or demo gods this morning. And my laptop is securely blue tacked down. So let's give this a go. Change the mirroring. Okay, how's that look? Does everyone see that okay? So if you're just a regular playing around, you open up Xcode for the first time, you'll get presented with this. Who has seen this before? Show of hands. Cool. If you haven't, open up Xcode. I promise you, it's exactly this. It is a Hello World app. You could submit it, sign it, send it through, or just connect a device, no problem. This on the right-hand side is Canvas. It does live changes. So if you want to change, you see the world, hello X world. And you see it's changing live on the right-hand side, right? Kind of cool. Same for this, the system name. This is for the image. So that's this little globe here. If I wanted to say, well, this looks a little buggy, so we're going to say ant. There is no anvil. Feature request, yes. This is reading in from SF symbols as part of that there. And same sort of thing, because of the image, or changes stuff like that. Tint is the color. If I wanted to say, oh, double dot, don't do that. Changes the color, right? Fairly straightforward. But I'm doing this live before I sign the app and submit it up. So the idea of app config is maybe I want to change all of these to be something that can be changed live externally by something like app config. So as Martha Stewart would say, here's something I prepared earlier. And a big shout out to a colleague of mine, Matthew Phillips, who I'll be honest, I ran out of time with this. And if I had more time, I probably would have done it, but it's one of those situations. It will take me a day, it'll take him an hour. So at 7 a.m., a few calls, we were just sort of working through all this here. So this is very similar to what we sort of seen here before. We put some comments, it might look a little scary, but we'll go through it here. So we still have our image, system name, but now I'm reading in from appconfigs.symbol. Because if we remember with the app config that's being put through is a dictionary. So there's keys and values. So the name of the dictionary is going to be, we've called it app config variables. Then the name of the key is going to be SF symbol in this case. Same thing, we've got hello, but I don't want to just be replacing all the text. I want to say hello, comma. So then I can also then do escape out to then do a variable for that. And for color, color's fun. I won't go too much into that, but ChatGPT helped a lot with color. The only real difference, or the big, or where the magic happens sort of thing, is we added a new Swift file here called appconfig. You'll see the difference here. I don't have an appconfig file. So inside here, Swift UI and Foundation, I have to define it as a variable. The keys are always going to be strings. So that's where I'm saying the keys are strings, but anything of the result is an any. It could be a string, but it could also be a bool for if we wanted to add a debug. We then have an initializer, and you can see printing. So this is when it initially launches. We'll get that init app config, and then we're going to try and get. So this is where we're going to read in the user's defaults. This particular section of code here is something that a lot of apps that we've encountered do not have. This is what works in with the changing settings live. Something that, oh, I've already, an app is already existing, and I want to reapply it. There's something inside user defaults at a top level called notification, change notification, right? So if you initiate that, it checks to then run, to then reread all of these settings, all right? Unfortunately, it's not at the nested level for a configuration. It's at the top level user defaults. So if someone did go in and change Celsius to Fahrenheit, miles to kilometers, something like that, it's going to trigger this again. So you can see here, when I was running it earlier, down the bottom, no app config present, ran 4 times. I didn't actually touch the app. User did change notification, can get a little noisy. So, but it's the only way that we've worked out how to be able to do live changes when we're making a change live without having to reinstall the app. So if we do on that there, and these are where I've defined actual static values in the event no app config was present. Otherwise, we're going to update them, and then we're going to read through each config. This is down onto the developer. They're defining what the keys are. Can't just pick whatever you want that makes sense for an admin. The developer gets to dictate this. Once we're doing that there, this is color. Color is annoying. And again, ChatGPT. Because color we're just doing as a hex, but Swift UI doesn't like hex as colors, so it has to change them into double characters. So this was ChatGPT. Because yeah, it's interesting. But then if we go back into our content view, the color is actually a function where we're then inputting in hex and then what the name we're expecting hex string. Won't go too into that detail there because really no one really wants to see that. So if I'm an app developer, I don't really have access to the MDM. Show of hands, who's an MDM administrator that lets their devs log into the console? Good. For the recording, that was 0 hands, and that's the right number. But that's also frustrating for a dev. And a dev's reading about this, it's MDM, MDM, MDM. How the hell am I doing that? Again, you're not really helping me in this. There is commands inside terminal was part of the Xcode simulator that they'll run. So if I run this, and this is on a MacBook Air, so let's see how we go. Not an M3, no, it is an M1. We got the simulator. Launching, there we go. So I've got no app config. Oh, content view. Where did I set my statics? Oh, I have changed that. This is what happens when you're trying to prepare. Make that a bit bigger. People see that? So there's a command in here called xcrun simctl spawn booted defaults write. And because we're writing into the user defaults, that's why we're defining the defaults there. This is where I change and define the path I'm going to, and I'm saying the dict and the MDM symbol. So if I put this as ant, if I put it back to globe or ant globe, we'd sooner get Anvil than ant globe. It doesn't update here, and that's again how simulator runs versus actual native hardware would be. So I would have to actually quit it, and that's back to globe, right? So there is still ways for MDM developers to be testing it without needing MDM. But then if we're a bit more savvy with it, or you want to try and enable them further, we can do it via the app itself. So here's my app here. I've got all my cogs here. Yeah, appconfig.org. Still run, I think, or owned by Avanti Mobile Iron. But yeah, there are so many broken links into here. Dev Center, resources, doesn't really get you much. But let me log into my Jamf server. So devices. Oh, device apps. So let me just move this across the side so we can see. Oh, I don't need the simulator anymore. So this is live. Yep. Quit. Cool. Open. All right. So there's the app that I've already uploaded to my Jamf server. Here's some example app config. Can we see that okay? Do I want to make it bigger? It's fine. So my string for hello world, I'll say $username. All right. That's it live on that there. All right. That's it being able to trigger the user notification to change, goes and refreshes. Done. All right. Really kind of cool. Let me go back. There's other commands if I wanted to change it. So I've got to my existing app config without Spotlight. Thank you very much. Now, one thing I will note is app config is sticky. So if I decided, you know what, I want to return this back to no app config whatsoever, that's not supported. You can modify, you can say, okay, I'll go from 1 flag to 2 to 5 to 20, assuming they support 20. But if you want to clear it away and reset back to that, that is a delete the app reinstall. So if I do this here, right, that's in live. That's with my debug, because we were playing around with that to make sure that what we were seeing is actually appearing. So I say, okay, I don't want the debug. It's also an example of where you would have a bool as a value rather than a string. So I'll say false. Or I say, you know what, I don't need that at all. Oh, keep the dict. And let's just change this from a tray to an ant. Right, still doesn't matter onto that there. So if you're also working on and reading from information outside of the app config section. So let's say you're trying to populate off extension attribute values, because Jamf has some really cool options for that. That doesn't inform that that something has changed, because that's happening outside of the app config. So you would still have to work at hitting an API endpoint that says refresh the app config. And there is an API endpoint that's available for that. You can put that into the app. On the JNUC presentation that I pointed to there, they actually list out what the app config is. All of the Jamf built ones have it natively so that they call them through. We are trying to find a way of making it more publicly available and using OAuth tokens and things like that. Yeah, so with that, and I'm very much sticking to how I do things. Last slide. That's all I had. Thank you very much for listening to me nerd out.
Do we have any questions?
Oh, there's a couple. Oh, but okay.
I have ideas.
You have ideas.
Oh yeah, and I also have a good Swift hex color extension too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's
okay.
what I use in Swift dialog.
Yeah, well, I don't look at your code. I just use it.
No one looks at my code.
Exactly.
Which is a good thing. With the app config, you mentioned if you say you nuke it, that does like it's sticky and all that sort of stuff. Can you trick it? Like you can say like here's an app config, but it's empty. And that sort of like wipes your config, I guess.
I'll put that back under here, but living it up is always fun.
What could go wrong?
What can go wrong? Exactly right.
Work for.
So if I jump back into here, so if you're saying I just have dict but nothing else in there. And where's QuickTime? So we can all see it together. No, it's expecting a key value.
Ooh, okay, we'll give it a dummy one or something.
If you give it a dummy one and you haven't written the code to expect what that is, you're going to get an error. And again, that's why it's down to the developer defining the key value schema. On Marco's blog, which is in Safari. Where's Safari? I already have Safari open. I only have one coffee today. This is what's going wrong with that. So again, fantastic. Links are all in this here. He has an example app, which just basically does a for any pulse through, but he just posts it up and it doesn't actually take any action onto it. So while I still want to call out his fantastic resources, and it really helped me go from 0 to 100, it didn't actually give me any value that I could sort of show to someone could take away with. Whereas if I saw like, okay, we're changing the text, we're changing an icon color, we're changing the actual icon, things like that. But that's where you need to define them to then take an action on them. Don't take the mic away from me.
I'm just presuming now, based on the removing that dict, if you went and defined, say, a whole bunch of those values, but then you say, "I'll go remove 2 or 3 of those."
Yeah, so
those ones you removed are still going to stick if you've deployed them out before.
They're still going to be present in there. So you could have something as a value that's reset instead of like with my debug. I'm looking for a specific key on that to say that. So you could say something like, hey, if state being and a value of reset to then put it to what you would set the defaults to be.
Yeah, that's on the dev though.
But that's on the dev, exactly. I think John had a hand raised.
All right.
Thank you. Cheers, Dan. So we're in theory getting an app made sometime next year, and one of the scope things I'm going to want to put in is this: if the developers look at me blankly, as well as pointing them at this presentation, can we pay Jamf to help them with it? Will Apple provide more support? Where do you get more? Because it seems it's pretty barren out there.
It seems barren. That's the problem. It isn't actually. It's just they're not knowing where to look for. There's an initiative internally at Jamf to try and get appconfig.org back on its feet. Unfortunately, Jamf doesn't own any of the domains or information to it. So there's a lot of background conversations happening behind closed doors and ignored emails. If you're as an app developer and you just say it's something that lives inside user defaults, and this will go up on the GitHub. I will put this back later, but if you are an app developer, you went developer.apple user defaults. First link, and not even pink, because this is a test machine. Someone's trying to airdrop something to me. Cool. We can see here, don't try these, some nice warnings here. And this is what's deterred developers, is they see a warning, because amazing, some developers actually read the warnings. Admins don't. But if we read that here, in between the two importings, there is an exception for managed devices in educational, organizationals, where you're able to do some stuff like that. I'm assuming I clicked on the right link. I might not have. But there is more information. So if you say that there's a specific key, and it's just literally that one key that lives within user defaults, that's all they need to know how to reference. What they do with that information afterwards is kind of on them. So whether they're how much you're trying to put in. We did try and theorize with making an app, and that Jamf Migrate app that I mentioned. Our first idea was like, we want to configure the entire app by app config. It's got 6 screens. We want to do the branding. We want to do the logo. We want to do everything. 144 app configs. Don't do that. And many MDMs don't support that amount. So you do want to keep it sort of small and available for what you're really trying to do. So think about what the app is trying to do, and then just you can say, hey, if you could look at doing this, that would make life a lot easier, especially a wider audience in an organization. Pete.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't realize that appconfig.org is down. That's a bummer. Who was running that?
So it was started by, Apple announced it in 2013. And they're like, this is something the MDM vendors are going to be loving. So on the founders, you'll see it's every major MDM at that time, IBM, Meraki, Jamf. SAP, technically they had an MDM back then, but they were also just a little boutique technology company in Europe, as Rich puts it. And then it was a case of, here we made a spec, but no one could agree on the spec. And it wasn't an initiative really being driven by Apple, really. And that's kind of where it fell away. So we are like, we see so much power with it. At Jamf, we use it all the time for the apps we want to do. And I know like the sales engineers and everyone's doing that. It's like, we have this app, it doesn't do this. We have to tell the user to go into these settings and hit this button, and then it does what we're trying it to do. Can Jamf do that for us? And the answer is always, I'm afraid not, unless they support the app config to do that flag. And so that's what we're going to do. No signal? Oh, no battery. No battery. Okay.
And John, I would just mention that quite a few hospital apps like Epic and things like that all support app config. So if you poke around some of those, a bunch of the education apps as well, just finding examples of other ways people are using it. Yeah, it could be really, really handy.
Like Zoom, anything that was trying to be pushed out, anything that was sort of written with an enterprise mindset, generally will have something. But the one that we like to call out is their ability to do that notification change so that you can update that app config on the fly, and that you don't have to either force quit and reopen the app or have to reinstall it altogether, which is a terrible user experience. But yeah.
All right then. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Illuminating.